Richard. I had a few questions about marketing, and so with today, everything is so saturated in social media. So how is your take on countering that and still being able to get businesses to advertise and things like that?
Sure. There's no doubt that media today, there's just such a proliferation of sites. I was at CES last year, and I bumped into the chief marketing officer for a large consumer products company. And I had just spoken at this session, and afterwards he said, I just can't keep it all straight. And I think that's the big challenge for brands today. You know, whether you're a Procter & Gamble or your Nissan or your Starbucks or any marketer, it's trying to kind of figure out how do we use these different channels. At the end of the day, it all kind of comes down to kind of groups of individuals and communities, because no marketer really wants to reach just one person, although that was kind of the promise in digital media. You need to have at least several people so they'll go buy your products. But there's no doubt that there's a proliferation. I think what I have learned over the years is to, first of all, understand what your product is, identify the audiences that it's relevant to, and then go figure out how to find them.
Great, thank you. Another thing I wanted to ask was, I know for me, one of the most influential commercials I've ever seen is part of my thing that draws me to marketing and advertising, and that was the Apple commercial of 1984. So was there ever a commercial or something that influenced you like that?
I was scared because this is the, do I know the commercial you're talking about?
Yeah.
And I know that one actually quite well. And I know the guys that did it out in California. That commercial, what's interesting about that commercial is it only ran one time. It ran during the Super Bowl in 1984. And the commercial, if you think about what was happening kind of outside at the time, in computing, basically a lot of people were stuck with one type of computer, and it was a PC. And Apple, obviously, wanted to launch the Mac in a breakthrough way. So when we talk about kind of identifying audiences, they went to one of the best storytellers who ever lived, a guy by the name of Jay Chiat and his partner Lee Clow of Chiat Day, and they wanted to do something that really broke through. And that ad, even though it ran one time, you and I are talking about it 30 years later, which is, I was a student here when that commercial ran. So, whoops, I just gave away my age. But that's a powerful message. And even though there's media proliferation, a powerful message can cut through. The challenge is, how do you come up with those breakthrough messages? Because there's no way to guarantee success on that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, is there, I guess, a campaign that you did that you were trying to strive for something like that? Just one single message so that people would be able to relate to it and it would resonate with others?
I've never thought about that question. And the interesting thing is I've always been on the selling side of it. But as a guy who sold media as opposed to a person who created advertising, ironically my brother, who's also a Wildcat, is a creative director and has done a lot of award-winning commercials for brands like Heineken and UPS and Nike. But if you take a look at, and I can tell you from my perspective, I worked for the Wall Street Journal for 10 years. And as a young sales representative, I would go call on companies in Silicon Valley, and we chatted earlier today about Silicon Valley. My job was to go make sure that my publications stood out in a sea of publications, and in this case it was business publications. One of the companies that I had the pleasure of working with was Motorola. And Motorola at the time, and this is going back to the early 90s, Motorola had done the unthinkable in bringing together Apple and IBM. And so Motorola, Apple, and IBM all came together to create a new microprocessor called the PowerPC. Due to doing a little bit of homework, I kind of went to an advertising agency who was doing their advertising, and I said to them, this is just the type of thing that you should take out to the world. Business people need to know about this. This is monumental. 3 companies coming together, right? PCs and Macs coming together. living in harmony. What ended up happening is taking that idea and driving that through. We were able to convince the client that this was a good idea. This could be a breakthrough moment. They certainly rewarded us with a couple $1 million, which was great for the company's bottom line. But even more so is that it helped tell a much, much bigger story to the world about technology. Not 1 week later, I had the same opportunity to do that with Adobe. And there's technology that never existed then, but if I tell you and I say the words PDF, you know exactly what I'm referring to. Those didn't exist back then. So talking to Adobe out in Mountain View, same type of concept, like here's a big idea, let's take this out. The funny thing, when you look at kind of the results and like what was the tangible payoff, for Motorola, on the Dow Jones news ticker, so this is, you can't buy that. This is just news that's coming through. It's not biased one way or the other. But at the end of the day, when that advertisement from Motorola launched, and this was a print advertisement, it was 12 pages in the Wall Street Journal, so they were making a statement. Motorola's stock went up by $419 million. Their total, I should say, total market cap went up one day because of one advertisement in an influential publication. Drove $419 million of extra value. And their competitor, Intel, their stock went down by a total of about $167 million. And that actually became a news story. Motorola shares seen up due to advertisement in the Wall Street Journal. And I like to think that I had a part with my team in doing that. The piece on the Adobe that's worth telling, and I have to share this, is none other than Vice President Al Gore called the CEO of Adobe and said, how can we start using this PDF technology in government? And we all know that Al Gore invented which actually there's truth to that, believe it or not, in my research. But those are the types of things that one can do to kind of drive an idea through, even if you're not the director.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for that. That was exactly what I was kind of wanting to know. And I mean, talking about the Wall Street Journal, like, what was your biggest takeaway from working there?
I learned a lot of things at the Journal. I think if I were to think about kind of the one big takeaway was to dream big. Dream big in coming up with ideas and having the courage to do so, even if you think they're crazy. Dream big in reaching out to people and looking to talk to. In business, you'll have day-to-day contacts that you'll do work with, but you should never be afraid to kind of understand the entire organization and look to the leadership. I had a time where I went into an investment bank and I got a meeting with the chief executive officer of the investment bank. It's a bank called Hambrick & Quist. They don't exist today, but they're one of the foundational investment banks that helped build Silicon Valley and raise a lot of money for Silicon Valley companies that people know. And I sat down with their CEO at the time and said to him, I'd like to show you what the Wall Street Journal is all about. And he's a Rhodes Scholar. His name was Dan Case. He sadly passed. His brother Steve Case, he was the CEO of AOL. And here was a 23-year-old who's going to sit down with a Rhodes Scholar who's the co-CEO of a large investment bank, and I'm going to tell him how to read the Wall Street Journal. And he said, I'm curious to learn. So I walked him through the publication, and he said to me after we were done, he said, I'm very appreciative that you just did that. He said, you may not know about investment banking, but I don't know anything about the Wall Street Journal, and I learned a whole bunch more than I would have known as a result of it. He said, please don't go do this with my competitors, which was his retort. So dream big.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably my takeaway from the Journal.
That's great. Yeah.
I know we were talking about this a little earlier, but failures are sometimes more striking and help you a lot more in your path than successes do.
Yeah.
Do you have a failure that really helped you either change what you're doing or improve yourself?
People have to be aware of is if you're failing, you're vulnerable, right? Because what do they say? success has many fathers and failure is an orphan, I think is the term. The key is to not be afraid to take the chance, even though it might fail. I think one has to think about the risks, and there are examples of companies who have taken great risks without really thinking about the consequences. I worked for the Procter & Gamble company, and a story that used to kind of float around the company was a company, I believe it was in England, that did a promotion, and they said buy a certain amount of boxes of detergent and you'll get a free washing machine. Mm-hmm. And the grocer went out of business. I can't validate that, but it's plausible. PepsiCo took a chance and did a promotion that if you bought, I think it was 1 million cans of Pepsi, you could win an F-15 jet fighter. So someone went out, did the math, and said, okay, let's see. F-15 jet fighter, I'm making this up, is $500 million. I need 1 million cans of soda at 45 cents. This seems like a good deal. And the person actually delivered the 1 million cans, and it was in lawsuit and arbitration. And whoops. But one really has to be willing to be vulnerable and willing to take a chance. And I certainly, over my career, have had those opportunities where I've taken a chance. A good example is just going into leaving kind of large companies where I started and then going to smaller companies. And smaller companies, you don't have a big kind of blanket of thousands of employees around you. You can run and hide in a big company, and I've certainly seen that over the years. But in small companies, that's it. You're there. If you're in marketing, sales, engineering, you're a quality assurance engineer, you're a production assistant. Everyone has to grab an oar and row. Mm-hmm. And I think that the stakes for failure kind of change a little bit. But leaving a large company to go to a small company certainly provides its risks. But at the end of the day, I've always felt that that's kind of a worthwhile risk, and it's also part of the fun and the excitement.
Well, and that's something else I was noticing. It sounds like all the things that you've sold in marketing, you've been really excited about. Or has that always been true, or do you have to kind of force yourself to be excited about something to sell it well?
I'm a passionate person. I've been a passionate person since I was 5 years old, probably. I interview hundreds of people in the course of a year. And what's interesting is the thing that I'm looking for, there's the credentials, there's the experience, but the thing I can't train someone on, and the thing that I can't recruit them for in terms of their credentials is passion. I'd also add optimism to that in terms of kind of like what can be. But as I said, I'm a passionate person. I have always been a passionate person. And I think there's passion within everyone. And if you're going to work with a company or you're considering a company, you should be passionate about a couple things. Number one is you should be passionate about the brand that you're working for. And that applies if you're going to Fox Studios to produce television programs, or you're going to work at the Library of Congress, right? Or you're going to work for Twitter. You should be passionate about these products. That to me is something that is absolutely critical. And you might find that you're not passionate about something, and when that passion starts to fade, then it's time to leave.
And do you think that's part of why you went to the smaller companies to regain that passion, or was that a different reason?
I've always had the passion. I think my personal journey was, I was recruited out of Arizona by the Procter & Gamble company, mm-hmm. who loves U of A, by the way. I've been out of P&G a long time, but they love U of A, and rightly so. I went to work for the Wall Street Journal. I was at Yahoo. I was at a large radio company called Westwood One that was sold to parts that were sold off to different companies. But I left those big companies to venture into smaller companies because what I was looking to do was take my talent and experience in digital media and marketing. And I firmly believe that we have just scratched the surface in terms of where digital goes, particularly now we look at things like video and we look at mobile and the growth. But I wasn't looking to rekindle my passion. What I was looking to do was channel my passion into smaller companies where I could have a much bigger impact.
That makes sense. And that's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
When you talked about digital media, this is something that I'm actually really interested in right now.
Yeah, you should be.
It's everywhere,
Yeah.
and it's so fun to watch, but at the same time, do you have any things that you look at when you're looking at digital media, like what you think is the good way to go, what you think is a good thing to sell, good branding? This is kind of related to her first question, too. Like, is there something that you're thinking of right now that you're just like, this is where we should go with digital media, or are you kind of going more with the flow?
So explain your question a little bit more, because it's a great question, and I could go a couple different ways. So from the standpoint of being someone that looks out at the industry, or is it someone who is thinking about how do I market, or how do I market my products?
Market? More of that.
So if you're a marketer, you can't ignore digital. I've been in digital media since it started. When I was at the Wall Street Journal, my clients in Silicon Valley were building essentially what would become the internet. Over the years, I've had several wonderful ideas. Some of them turned into something like fantasy sports, for example. Missed that one. But what has happened today, 63% of media time is spent on a mobile device. 63% of media time. That includes print, television, you name it. And marketers cannot ignore this channel any longer. When I got to Yahoo, and so internet starts in 1994. That's when the internet began, 1994. When you kind of pull all the pieces together. Mm-hmm. If you take a look, when I was at Yahoo in 2004, about 3% of packaged goods companies, so these are consumer products companies, Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, right? Big companies that provide something to, everyone on this campus uses at least one of those products, right? They were putting 3% of their money into the digital channel. 3. This is 2004. It's not like this is 20 years ago, right? I mean, we're talking 12 years ago. The internet just continued to climb and grow. And today, I was actually reading, I guess it was from probably 2 years ago, when the CFO of P&G gave an investor report. The company now puts between 30 to 40% of its money in digital. So 10 times growth in roughly about 10 years. And that's only going to continue. And there's always going to be companies that move very quickly. Online brokerage firms is a good example. So people like E-Trade, right? E-Trade, I called on E-Trade when it was 10 people. They were above the TOEFL Center on California Avenue in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. I remember walking out of the meeting with my sales rep, and I said, I don't think we want to spend much time here. Right? I missed that one. The point of the matter is that these companies were changing and transforming how things were done. Brokerage firms tend to move very quickly because they're comfortable with risk. We talked about risk earlier. But when you're looking at large packaged goods companies, they have a lot to lose if they mess things up. Mm-hmm. But over time, they've realized that there are massive audiences online. And as soon as there's an audience that grows, there's going to be a marketer that wants to tap into it. So as a marketer looking at the digital channels, it would be foolhardy not to. It would be so odd. And it could be like if you think 30 years ago or let's say 20 years ago, it would be odd to do digital. Today it's kind of the opposite. One of the things that my colleagues and I have kind of opined over the years is that at some point there will be a day when we don't talk about digital media. It's just media. And I don't know if we're there yet, but we're pretty darn close.
Great. I think that's great. Thank you so much.
It's great, and it's thrilling for me to be back on campus. To see kind of the red and blue. Thank you for that, Angelina. But Arizona is an incredible school, and companies I mentioned earlier. The company that I was recruited by. But the reason why our company would come here, this is what the recruiters told me, is the thing about Arizona is the students at Arizona have an incredible work ethic. They are people that are not entitled, and they're people that realize that there's things we have to do. And certainly in my group, which I was recruited in the sales division, but I know, and I use Procter & Gamble as an example just because I know it, but Procter & Gamble recruits engineers out of Arizona. They recruit marketing people out of Arizona. They recruit salespeople. So that that's something that's fantastic. So I hope that kind of our discussion today helps. If it just helps one person, then I think it was worth it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.